want to start by asking Professor Wolff, as an economist yourself, what do you make of the appointment of Mr. Navarro, who has been writing a book about death to China, something like that, even though he argued he didn't give the title to the book, but rather the publisher, in order to sell more books. What do you make of his coming into this very key position?
So great to be here. Look, I think this is a cause for some concern. Throughout the history of globalization and international trade, we've seen efforts by mostly elites, when they come under pressure from general publics, to blame foreigners for the ills that afflict their society. It is no doubt true that there are many in the United States that are economically hurting. It is equally no doubt true that their problems do not stem from China and do not stem from trade, but that one thing that has happened is, as the fortunes of some middle-class Americans have declined, that has been historically coincident with the rise of China. However, correlation does not make causation, and we will all be worse off. All of us will be poorer, including those self-same people that Trump appeals to, or Mr. Navarro with that rhetoric, if we give in to the rhetoric and imagine it's anything other than a short way to feel better. So as an economist, I'm concerned. As a citizen, I'm concerned. I do think there's plenty of opportunity to avoid the worst case scenario, but this is reasonable cause for concern as a citizen or an economist, in my opinion.
Mr. Xie, can punishing China, quote unquote, be able to buy U.S. time in order to move its economy forward?
Well, building an economy or rebuilding economy for a big country like the USA is not a straightforward process. Things just don't happen overnight. By focusing on China and try to so-called penalize China, in my view, is not going to provide a right-away solution for the U.S. The U.S. need to really figure out, what is the right strategy for itself if they want to create jobs and want to, regain the manufacturing competitiveness. But I have to think that the solution is not only on focusing on China. There's a lot more that they need to do.
Well, at this point, currency manipulator, 45% tax on Chinese imports, those are the rhetoric coming from President-elect Mr. Trump. Some take it very seriously, others say he would not be able to realize it because there's still a congressional approval. But obviously, he's trying to make those come true to a certain extent. Professor Liu, therefore, I want to ask you, what would that mean for the Chinese economy? Are we going to see a win-lose situation between the U.S. and China, or a lose-lose situation once a trade war starts?
Well, actually, you talked about the Peter Navarro. That I see the two sort of irony within him. Number one is that he started this book by viewing the fact that many of the Chinese graduates in the United States are really taking over the jobs from the U.S. But he ignored the fact that so many Chinese students have been paying the tuition to support the education industry export of the United States. So number two is that I seldom read any economist who is really viewing trade as a zero-sum game. So therefore,
well,
whether this is going to be
translated, you now can read his book.
Whether this can be really translated into the White House policy, I really feel very doubtful. But the fact, by setting up the National Trade Council, versus the, I do not know how to divide the work with now the existing Foreign Trade Council, which is there for 100 years. So the, that can only, this type of seemingly tougher policy can only anger China and anger those proponents for the free trade, but that doesn't really serve the fact to realize what is so claimed as is the policy goal of the United States.
Professor Liu, you did raise an interesting point, that is the bureaucratic possible conflict within the American government about what to do and what not to do. Will they be able to stream that out? Professor Wolff, I don't want you to predict the policies of the shall I say, Trump administration, because it could be a little bit dramatic, but politically speaking, will these bureaucracies, newly created, traditionally existing, really be able to work together well, or there's likely to be more chaotic situation before anything could ever happen?
Yeah, so I think we're already seeing that there's going to be a lot of different groups, both traditional and then newly made up groups working at cross purposes, possibly having their own leaks or press conferences, sometimes contradicting each other. And what I think we're going to get is a real sort of tangle of different policies, perspectives. But I would say one other thing, which I think we'd probably all agree on, but I think is important, which is rhetoric has consequences even when it does not pass into policy.
Right.
And nasty rhetoric that might appeal domestically has international reverberations, and you cannot unsay the things you said, even when you realize later perhaps they were said in error.
Very interesting. Professor Wolff, I know you wouldn't be able to notice, but behind you there was another cable news network as program being shown on one of the TVs, and it certainly told a story in a very different perspective called China Makes Trade War with the United States. That's, of course, it's a very different perspective. Like you said, the rhetorics as we see. Let me come to you, Mr. Xie. What about that? Eventually, when countries compete economically, what do they compete about? Do they compete about rhetorics and the votes they could have from their constituencies for their next election? Do they compete about the best and most favorable policies toward the businesses and companies? Do they compete about international credibility of leading the next round of innovation and new industrialization? What do they compete about fundamentally, Professor? Mr. Xie.
Well, first of all, the perceived priority, is a function of the political system of the countries, right? So, in a country like the U.S. where, presidential election happens every 4 years, it motivates the candidates to say things that, whether they truly mean it or not, as long as it sort of can get votes, that's the critical thing. And I think that's, perhaps some of the issues that we're facing here. But if we're talking about the real competition across different countries, it's got to be based on the relative competitive advantages of the countries. Which country has what competitive advantage, and why are they doing better at certain things than some other countries, and what they can improve their competitive advantages on. And usually, at least based on our experience looking at different countries over the years, is usually based on innovation. It's based on openness, based on collaboration, and so on and so forth. That's going to be the more important elements of competitiveness rather than political rhetoric.
Right. Professor Liu, therefore, I want to throw in an interesting example. A story happened here in China. That is Mr. Cao Dewang, who is the CEO and founder of one of the most well-known Chinese car glass providers. He manufactured car glass to provide glasses for GM and Ford, many of the most well-known cars. He talked about he probably wants to invest more in the United States because the tax could be too much here in China. That created a huge debate here in China about with incoming US President Mr. Trump talking about 15% tax only corporate. And China now at this point probably even more than 35 to 40%. People are saying, where is China's competitive edge? Plus labor. Some suggest it's already getting the same price as the Eastern European countries and Russia. And meanwhile, there is other elements, for example, inventories, the prices of electricity, water, and things like that, transportation. Will China be competitive when it comes to real issues?
Well, competition comes from many dimensions, and the government attitude towards business is really a wild card. And so whether they have the sort of the certainty that is able to shape the business environment is one. I think China is also moving very spearheadedly into that direction, and the success for attracting foreign investment as the largest recipient of FDI shows the fact. And the other is that whether you have the right type of industrial cluster. So right now we can see that along the coast region of China, you see so many industrial clusters. You want to build a Boeing factory. You want to build a scooter assembly plant. So within 3 days, you almost can find all the suppliers. So the infrastructure and the clusters are there. So the demographic dividend has been really winning, which is a fact. But there has been continuous supply of many other preferential policies that the United States cannot really compete. And plus, more importantly, it is really the closeness to the market, to the rising market of China and with its neighboring countries.
But what about the market is elsewhere? That's an interesting question. At this point, we do want to take a look at the tax because corporate tax has been so much debated during the upcoming, leading up to the US presidential election. And in this regard, China is among the highest taxed country in the world. According to the World Bank, of course, this number is coming from the World Bank, the total tax rate for businesses in China was 68% in the year 2016. In contrast, the total tax rate for US was only, at this point, 44%. The labor tax rate in China was as high as 48.8%, well above the world average of 16.3%. That, of course, is still the number coming from the World Bank. It is arguable, but still these numbers could be of some reference. Mr. Xie, when you hear corporate tax could be as low as 15% in the United States, as Mr. Trump promised the businesses. And also when you see China also try to slash back its taxes for the corporates and companies, at the same time trying to streamline the excessive administrative procedures. After all, 1/3 of them has already been gotten rid of over the past 2 years. What exactly do you think, Mr. Xie, the two countries are really competing about?
Well, as I mentioned, the basis of competition is actually about competitive advantages, and competitive advantages is partially based on the cost structure and how much it takes, the cost to do business across different countries. In this case, it's very clear that, first of all, I agree with you. Whether or not the data from the World Bank report on Chinese tax is actually accurate is debatable. But nonetheless, it is also our experience when we work with different clients, corporate clients in China, that indeed the feelings about the tax burden, as well as just the cost of doing business in China is very high. And therefore, it is critical for the Chinese government, at least in our view, to really look at the tax structure to see if there's any room to reduce it so that China can gain or regain some competitive advantages on the cost structure of doing business.
I see. Before we go, only 30 seconds left for you, Professor Wolff. Can this be, all these rhetorics, become something with a silver lining for the two governments to really streamline their policies and encourage real manufacturing, real businesses, and economy to grow?
Yeah, we do have an opportunity to grow up in our trade rhetoric here and face some basic facts which have been absent to debate. And those would be the United States manufacturing output is now quite high and it's pretty competitive. We don't compete directly with China. Technology and a different division between profit and wages are what people are angry about, probably not trade, and we'll all be better off if we get to a debate centered on those facts.